I'll be discussing the essay that is due coming over through the weekend. I actually will probably move the date a little bit. This was supposed to have already been included in the previous video. However, I neglected to push the resume recording button. I paused the recording while waiting for a student to come in through Zoom. And I had a question from another student. I immediately started talking about the topics and did not go back to the computer to push the button. So I apologize for that, but we're going to be looking at our topics here and just go over some details, help you understand a little bit more about how to approach these. We'll look at some of the details and also go through some of the details in the chapters that you can look at. But as you're looking at the topics, of course, the opening here says it's over chapters 9 through 14. In case you didn't recognize, the topics are actually arranged in that order, with the first topic from 9, the last topic from chapter 14. So the 10, that's where you can find those. You want to write this as an essay that, as it says here, demonstrates critical understanding. Approximately 1,000 words or so in length. You can write more if you need to. And yes, I also teach English, so I do expect to see, as it says here, the hallmarks of good writing. That means correct grammar, correct mechanics, sound writing, showing your ability to interpret and explain the topics. You need to make sure that you proofread to correct any mistakes before you submit the essay, so that you're going over your punctuation, your mechanics, your grammar. I give you this length of 1,000 words because I do believe that you can adequately cover the topic in that, but you may, depending upon the approach you're going to take and the details you're trying to offer in the view of your discussion, may need to have further, longer development. You are to follow MLA standards. That means you will double space your essay. You'll tab over for the paragraphs. You'll have a proper heading and title. You will also include citations throughout your essay when you draw information from sources. And you will have a works cited page appropriate for those sources. So let's look at the topics. The first one talks about legends, which technically the word legends means things read aloud. That during the Middle Ages, this was how they quite often used those stories to convey, to help symbolize what was considered important, since the morals or values, their ideals. The idea of the ideals being the standards that they wanted people to embody. And those quite often were done so in the figure of some sort of hero or heroine. When you look at that chapter 9, it talks about some of that in regard to Beowulf, where it discusses that particular work of literature, and then it also discusses the Song of Roland. So really you're looking at narrative stories that offers that kind of view. And then I ask you in this topic to think about the current popularity of these superheroes. It says hero, superhero, in movies and shows, so you're going to focus on that aspect, the movies, the shows. And it raises the point, do we still need heroes and heroines to be examples for us? The figure of Roland or Beowulf were examples for the medieval figures. Well, do we need to have such figures? Do we need a Superman? Do we need a Captain America? Do we need a Black Panther? Do we need any of those to serve as examples of what we need to be in the sense of our morals? What we consider as personal and societal values. And in what ways are these heroes being presented today to represent the morals? What morals are they standing for? What values are they representing? In our society, we sometimes have what the term has been used as the anti-hero. If you've ever seen the movie Venom, read the comic book, not necessarily the nicest of person. In the movie, you've seen that movie recently, Eddie, who contains the Venom symbiote, is constantly telling them, you can't eat just anybody, you have to eat only bad people. But the way Venom goes about what he does is not necessarily the nicest way. I put hero or superhero because there's sometimes an argument about what constitutes a superhero. The superhero, must that individual have powers of some sort? There's an argument of you who may be familiar with the debate about, is Batman really a superhero? the commentary there is that he doesn't have any special powers. He just has cool toys. So he's not only a superhero. Well, that's debatable depending on how you want to look at it. But again, those are the kind of figures you'd be looking at. In the textbook, and I'm hoping this will work. Yes, I'm still there. Okay. Hold on. We've lost the page here. Bear with me just a moment. I logged into this sometime trying to get this going. And if you're not on it all the time, it tends to catch you off. There we go. This is about the Song of Roland. And when you look at this particular aspect, it even goes into the detail about what this topic covers. It sort of gives you a summary of what the story is about. It's an epic poem, set in the 8th century, but really about the 11th. So it was written about 200 plus years later after the actual event. As it says here, that this particular work offers about the character, the situation that he finds himself in. That, as it says here, it shows the virtues of courage and strength, comradeship of the battlefield, the power of great men, the venality of evil ones. The idea about good and evil is part of it, and the heroism that Roland has as he lies dying, because even in his death, he is willing to strive to do something for the betterment of the others. He blows his horn to warn Charlemagne's forces about the trap that was set up. It says here, this idea that what we see is that it's telling the exploits of figures, Orlando or Roland, and that we have this idea that what he represents are these chansons. They're trying to show us in these views, these ideas, these attitudes. When you go on and look into this one and discusses those ideas, we also have about Beowulf and the details of it. I'm trying to get to where that one's talked about. Here, about the legend of Charlemagne. Excuse me, we'll just go to that one. And that his idea about Charlemagne's legend, he becomes sort of this embodiment, a larger-than-life figure, so that he's not so much just an individual, but he's supposed to represent what is regarded as the central concepts of the view. It says here that memory of Charlemagne and his time kept alive in these, where they bring out these stories to celebrate these heroes, to show people, here's what we need to be like. And it becomes an important aspect here that we see this. And of course, as you go through this section in your textbook, it looks at these ideas. This idea of, as it says here, a mixture of imagery and plot, Christian valor, as opposed to wickedness and treachery. So there's a bias, as it says here. But it does try to show these views and attitudes of these figures and what they represent and how they are supposed to be presented. The brave Roland acting in a way that is presented to show these true values and this idea about heroism and courage. At the end of the chapter, of course, if I can get to that one, it talks about Beowulf, fantastic tale of men battling monsters. The idea of Roland used to teach the values of patriotism and courage. And that's all part of what we see in these stories. And if you go back up here to the different ones here, I'm going to try to find, there it is, about Beowulf. This whole idea is that, again, a story that was concerning a much earlier era, but it's supposed to show us instead these qualities that we're expected to have. And again, this is part of what we're looking at, and the topic asks you to think about how our contemporary views and presentations of heroes are being used. So you should be focused on the legends, Beowulf, Roland, that kind of storyline to help us understand about what are these key traits that they want us to see, what is it that we're supposed to know and recognize when we read through these stories. And then how heroes are presented today in the movies, the shows that we have. There's a new one on the CW, Superman and Lois, taking the Superman storyline again. And that was a little different. You have Superman and Lois are living back on the farm in Smallville, and they're having to figure out how to make bills, and they've got 2 sons and trying to deal with that. And is that really what we expect to see from our superheroes? And that's why I asked you to discuss about our media more interested in the strengths or the weaknesses of the heroes and superheroes, the heroines and the heroes. When we look at the struggles that is presented sometimes. If any of you saw the Disney Plus series, WandaVision, well, there you have a presentation of a heroine. It's a little darker, has some issues. And what is it that this is trying to reveal to us about what our heroes are, and does she even qualify as a hero when you look at the Scarlet Witch? And so we have some of these views that are a little tempered now in modern society. And I'm asking you to think about that, what the heroes of the Middle Ages represented, what they were trying to show, and what are the heroes that we see in literature and movies and shows are trying to show us now. So that's what you should focus on when you're looking at that topic. The second topic is a little different. It's actually doing much more of a historical search in regard to Scholastica and Bridget. And when you go through the chapter, for instance, this chapter 9, talks about women monastic life. You don't get much about these 2 figures. They're named. Benedict's sister Scholastica gets a sentence. Bridget gets a couple of sentences. They don't get much. I could have included Hilda, but I didn't. I just put Scholastica and Bridget. These actually are much more major figures, really, in the early days of the church than our book would probably give you an indication. The term monastic, as the topic says, it's generally thought of as just about men, but we have women in the early days of the church. The monasteries were for men and women. You don't have the separation till later. The convent for women develops later. Scholastica, for instance, as it says in your book here, she was head of a monastery. That means there were men at that particular facility that she was the head of. She led that monastery. In fact, there's a storyline about Benedict Scholastica having an issue, and they come together about a theological issue. And then occurs that helps to correct who knows what. But this is where I ask you to do more research, to take very limited comment in your textbook and do some research about it, because that's important. There are some details in our textbook that sometimes don't get covered, and these 2 particular figures, Bridget of Ireland, for instance, is a major figure for quite some time in Ireland, England, and across Northern Europe, for instance. As it says here, there are churches dedicated to her. And she really was a figure that was important. So I ask you to do some research on those and look at those. The next one, I ask you to look at architectural style. So we've had so far literature in the first one, where you're looking at the legends, the Song of Roland, Beowulf, that kind of storyline from the medieval era, and looking at the literary depictions of heroes, movies, shows, for instance. If you want to use the comic book references, you can. The comic books and the movies tend to differ. If any of you are into the Marvel, DC universe, and they're constantly reinventing those heroes. DC just a few years ago redid all the origin stories of the major figures in the comics. But so you have literature, you have a historical aspect with Scholastica or Bridget. And now I'm moving into, I gave you a topic talking about architectural style, Romanesque and Gothic, and that would be yes, I'm still here. This is about the Gothic cathedral, and there's the Gothic style. This is in chapter 10. And when you go through that chapter, of course, it talks about Saint Denis, the Gothic style that developed. Again, you can click on that and it'll give you a brief little detail. And you can look at those views about how that changes. And again, when you look at the chapter, you see characteristics of it. They're listed here. I'll try to move this over just a little bit so you can get the view. I'm trying to get this to be a little bit bigger. It's not wanting to do it, but that's about all I can do. So here's the idea about the Gothic style and the major characteristics and what it's like as compared to the Romanesque style that you can look at. And again, here gives you a listing of some of the major characteristics of those. And so you can go through your textbook and see those, and again, about the major cathedrals and what they're like. The meanings of the Gothic cathedral is a section, hopefully you remember that part, about what they represented, the preeminent building in the town, and the details there. So when you look at the topic, it asks you to think about the Gothic style. What are the key traits? Just pointed some of those out in that illustration. You can go back and look at the Romanesque style. The idea about what they represent, the part we were just looking at shows that one. Again, what it talks about here, the meanings of it, and its functions, what they serve, and how does that differ from the monastic communities? And the Gothic cathedral is going to be built within a city, the urban origins. Now, we may not think of them as very large cities now, 10,000 people or so at the time, but monasteries, of course, were always built out in an isolated area. They would be outside of any community. So that when you go back and you look at the monasteries, for instance, in chapter 9, and it talks about the regulated day of the monastery, you can see the details here, what it would be like in that way. And then the idea about the monasticism, what that was part of it, and how it was set up. Again, this is in chapter 9. And St. Benedict and his rule, his edicts, of what it should be like. Here's the day of what a monk would have been like. But when you look at this particular part about the Gothic cathedral and what its purpose was and how it differs, you can use those two details from chapter 9 and then chapter 10. And in chapter 10, it goes a little bit more about what they were offering and how they developed it, the idea of these aspects, for instance, here, about the cathedral, such as in Chartres, what they represented, how it was, this idea about the people rose and ate and went to bed, and the tolling of the bells, and so literally what the cathedral represented as opposed to what the monastery was. And so you get the comparison there. The next one asks you, again, in chapter 10, to talk about the university system that develops and compare it to the modern college university system. When you go into chapter 10 and look at the rise of scholasticism and the rise of this one, modern-day institutes have their roots in the Middle Ages, is how it starts off. We go back to that one. Well, here we have about the rise of universities, what they were like, where they came from, how they developed, the intellectual aspects to it, and then when you move further in the chapter, talk about why it's called dialectics, which simply really means the exchanging of ideas, if you will. And so you can see this, why is emphasized there, and how the universities rose from that. And then, of course, you have the University of Paris as an example of what the universities were like, what they focused upon, how they developed, the idea about where the concept of degrees would come from. The University in Bologna is generally recognized as the first university to offer a degree. And the idea about education and what is part of it, well, this particular part goes into those, and what we're expecting, how they were set up, and the views there. And then, of course, you're more familiar with the modern view of the school, university, or college. Well, this gives you some idea about what student life was like, how it was set up, what courses you took, how you're expected to be. Here's an example of a typical day. I'm sure, as you go through this, you're thinking, Yes, it doesn't differ so significantly from the modern one, especially when you read this letter about the father writing to his son saying, you're not, I hear word that you're wasting your money, and or wasting my money and your time. And then the son writes back basically saying, send more money. Uh, that never happens today, I'm sure. But you can go through and look at the details here about university and what's developed in that time. And so, again, that's what this one's asking you to do, to look at how universities in the medieval era set up, what they're providing, what was being taught, who the faculty members were, what the students were, what they were like, what their days were like, compared to the modern university or college. The idea about the required curriculum, what they were expected to cover. And, this is what they did. The courses they took, that's what they had to take. Well, we have required courses too. Now, you sort of think about that. Should required courses still be part of it? Should there be more of an openness to curriculum? And support that one with details. The next topic is about the Crusades. And when you go through your textbook, you'll recognize that the Crusades are not really mentioned much. Literally, if you go through chapter 10 and go back to chapter 9, there's not much of a reference about the concept of the Crusades and what they did. Well, this one then gives you a chance to do some research over the Crusades, where you're choosing a particular Crusades, and there were several over the course of a several century long era, and to take one particular crusade and discuss what its purpose was, what was the intent, who participated in, how was it funded, what was the result of it, did it actually fulfill its goals, what was the impact on the culture. We've talked about at different times, for instance, Louis IX of France buying the relics and putting them into his chapel. We're talking about the architectural style, of the radiant style. Well, those relics that he purchased, the relic, for instance, at Chartres, the tunic or garment of Mary, for instance, many of those were brought back from the Crusades and sold, and other aspects took place as well. So I ask you to sort of do a research about a particular Crusades and its consequences and impact. One of the nice aspects of it for that one, if you go to our library resources and click on it, I'm going to open this up in a new tab. If you look here and put the Crusades, it's going to ask me to log in, which is what you have to do. Just log in with your Canvas login. It'll take you to the library resources, and this is where you really want to go. There's some really good works there you can look at. Here's a little summary for, as it says here, research started. Here you go, from 1095 to 1270, just a little over, not quite 200 years. You can get some details there. And then this one is a really good book. It is an ebook, and if you click on it, you can actually look at the text here. You can just click on it. You can also look at the table of contents, and again, you can look at particular parts of it, such as the Holy Land Falls, the Two Champions, Two Doomed Crusades. This is a really nice chapter in this book. It's supposed to open. Here we go. Yeah, here we go. And so literally here it is. It's about the Fourth Crusade. And so you can read through and get the details about the Fourth Crusade, who was involved, what occurred. All this is part of it. And so it really is a nice little section here to look at. So our library resources are really good here to go with. There's some further ones about the Crusades here. This one gives you a short introduction to them. Again, this is also an ebook. I should just click on table of contents, what I wanted. If you go here, it gives you the impact of the Crusades. Yeah, that's what I was looking at. The impact of the Crusades. So that as part of the question I asked you to discuss the impact that the Crusades had. And so if you go through here, it'll give you details about here's the Fourth Crusade named again, and some of the impact it had, the details that occurred. So this is all part of what you can look at. Our library gives you some really good resources for this particular topic to look at. It really does. And then this one talks, this is again another ebook, and it talks about the myth about and we'll just go table of contents. The myth about the Crusades, what's always associated with them. And then it also talks about other aspects that were part of it. And then this one is strictly about the First Crusade. So if you want to learn about that one, again, it just goes into full details about that one crusade. What took place, how it occurred, how the West responded, the crusade unraveling, and the consequences of it. So if you look at the First Crusade, for instance, this is a really good work to look at if you're looking at that particular title and that particular crusade. So that's what you need to do for this one. Again, it's mostly research where you have to do some reading. Our textbook won't help you. The word crusade, the concept of the crusade was mentioned a couple of times, but that's about it. This next one, the sixth topic, focuses on the Black Death, the Black Plague. Since we've been going through last few years, most of you are probably familiar with the idea of a pandemic. Well, this gives you a chance to go back and look at another one. And again, if you go to our library resources, you'll be able to locate quite a bit about those. So if I put Black Plague up here, and search for it, give it a moment, and you suddenly get all sorts of ones here, literally over 40,000. But this is a really good ebook where it goes into details about it. It's written for a younger audience, but it's handled fairly nicely. Moving back here, there's other ones to look at. This one is about pandemics in the 14th century. It's an article that's about 8 pages. This one, where did it go? Hold on here. Okay, it's not showing it. Hold on, let me do this again. Under advanced search, let me start a new one. Because it didn't call up everything that it was supposed to. Still not doing it. Let me just Black Death. Let's just do it that way. Maybe that's how I do it. Yeah, there you go. The bubonic plague. This is where the research starter takes place, and that's what I was looking for. Where it goes into detail what the bubonic plague was, what causes it, the idea of the history of it is down here a little bit. And then, again, this particular ebook is one that works really well. You have the table of contents, if that will open, it will open. So let's go here. Well, you have the whole book here that you can look at, where it goes in and talks about the details, and you can download this particular book if you need to. And it's, again, a useful book. I'm trying to move back. And you have, again, this is, okay, there's the one I was looking at. Okay. This is the one I was trying to find. This is a book that talks about the impact of it. You can actually look for this one. There's a table of contents here. Oh, it's not wanting to work. Never mind. It's actually a good book to look at. There's this one that you can also look at by me. M.E.E. calls me. You have other aspects. Here's the one about the complete history of the Black Death. This is a online access. You can access it that way. This particular article talks about the economic impact of the Black Death. A good article to look at, just to give you an idea. It's somewhat lengthy. Let me go back over here and change up the search just slightly. We want to make sure we find full text so that you can get everything. And if you click the full text, it'll actually call up the ones that you have access to. And so you can look at these. And again, this is what you want to look at. This one, among other things, talks about how plagues have changed the world, including the Black Death. It's just a part of the article. The idea of the after the plague came the Renaissance and how the plague actually impacts to a certain extent that one. The idea of a medieval city dealing with Black Death that had been in quarantine, which again something we're familiar with. So again, a number of these articles are there for you to look at. So again, if you choose topic 6, that's what you want to look up and work from there. Number 7 focuses on Machiavelli. He's in chapter 12, and I'm probably going to have to call up chapter 12 again. Yes, I'm still here. Well, that's chapter 11 anyway. Okay. Let me go to chapter 12. Yes, I'm still here too. If you don't stay focused on it, it tends to not want to call up everything. Machiavelli is mentioned here in chapter 12, and you have a couple of excerpts. Here's part of it from chapter 18, and then this one is also from the part where it talks about the prince and his basic theme. So I ask you to consider the excerpts given, and when you read through that advice that he offers here, you've probably heard the expression, better to be feared than to be loved. This idea about keep your enemies close. Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. Those are all comments essentially taken from Machiavelli's advice to anyone who wants to rule. He's the title of the prince, the ruler of the state. And so you can go through this and look at this advice, the idea about that he talks about in details. That cruelty or hypocrisy is permissible. Cruelty will help you to hold on to power, discouraging revolution. And the idea is it better to be loved, to be feared? Well, he says it's better to be feared. And so I ask you to look at what his advice actually involves, and is that really ethical or useful way for someone to rule? Can a state, a government be successful acting in this way? And I ask you to offer, is his view of humanity accurate? Is it pessimistic? Is it something else? I ask you to discuss the advice that Machiavelli offers, and can we see it still operating today? And is that such a style that, what does that show us about what it means to be human? So you get to discuss that one if you want to look at Machiavelli. The 8th one also comes from the same chapter, and talks about the Medici family, the Medici era. And so you have details about them in a couple of the presentations. If you go back to the earlier videos, I've talked about the Medici family. Here's Cosimo and what he was like. And then you have what he led to in the sense of art and other areas. The Pazzi conspiracy, of course, where Giuliano and Lorenzo were attacked. Giuliano, of course, was killed. But this idea about what they were like and how they were when Lorenzo takes over, and you have Lorenzo, the magnificent one, and what he was like and what they contributed. Of course, the Medici family continued to rise in power off and on throughout the late 15th, early 16th century, even so that when you get to one of the later chapters, they'll talk about Catherine de' Medici becoming the Queen of France. So you have the Medici family here and what they were like, and the impact that they had on society, including humanism. And so this topic asks you to look at the Medici family, as it moves through power, what happened to them, how they regained power, their patronage, which I was just looking at in the sense of the humanism here, and what the Platonic Academy that Cosimo set up, and that was continued by Lorenzo. When Lorenzo, of course, brought in people and continued to as it says here, sponsor, was a patron for artists like Botticelli, Michelangelo, and others, a number of these different figures. And so I asked you to look at those, this idea about their patronage, and how that differed from particularly Julius II, who's discussed in one of the other chapters. How Julius II, for instance, treated Michelangelo, compared to how the Medici family, when Michelangelo was much younger. How that did, the idea about funding sporting arts. What did that have to do with how the Medici family was part of that one? And then how does this one family and its support, what does that show us about this era? That way that one family could be so dominant. And what does it show us about business, politics, finance, all those areas that the Medici family really dominated, not just in Florence, but really across Europe for quite some time. So that's what that topic asked you to look at. Recently, I don't remember which one of the channels it was. It was HBO or Showtime or one of the streaming channels. They did a whole series about the Medici family. That sort of, brought the more attention and new attention to what they represented. The ninth topic focuses on Michelangelo. We just mentioned him. And when you go into chapter 12, you see some of that. You see about Michelangelo being mentioned here, the details here. Again, here it talks about the Medici family again with its influence on music. That'd be for the other topic. It talks a little bit about Michelangelo, but he's also talked about in other chapters. And yes, here we go again. If you leave it for just a couple of minutes, it never seems to want to stay up. Here we go. Wait for this to open up. Patience. Here we go. Maybe it'll open this time. Yes, I'm still there. Okay, this is about El Greco. Let's go back to this one. See if we can get this one to recall. Come on. Let me see if I have to search, and we'll see if we can get Michelangelo this way. Okay, so here we go. Maybe this will call this up here. Here we go. Maybe we can get this to work. Okay, good deal. So again, Michelangelo's offered. That's in the preview. Now we want to move on through chapter 13. So let me go back to our course. Get to the module and reload chapter 13 very quickly. It's just, as you probably found out, it gets a little interesting at times trying to get these to show up. So here we go. Cengage doesn't always cooperate. This is all we're getting here. For some reason, chapter 13 is not calling up. Let me see if I can go to the full book. Alright. Sometimes you have to do this because chapter 13 is not one. Oh, wait a minute, here it comes. We just didn't wait long enough. Okay, there we go. And you have a whole section in chapter 13 over Michelangelo that you can use for part of this and the details about his art. And that's really what this topic looks at. Sorry for the delay there. It asks you not to give a life study of Michelangelo, no biographical study, but it asks you to do a study of his work. He has distinct periods when he's the younger Michelangelo, such as when he's in Florence with the Medici family, when he's a little older and Julius II calls him in, to start work on the development of St. Peter's, when he's forced basically to do the Sistine Chapel, when he does other work. And I actually choose works from each of his periods of his life. And again, if you look at that particular chapter, okay, here we go, you'll see that it offers, here's his Pietà, which would be from his early period. His David, also from a fairly early period. His Moses, a later period. You'll notice it's almost 20 years after his Pietà, 15, 20 years. So that's a different era. His Sistine Chapel, which is also about 20 years after his Pietà, when influence of Julius II. His, and that's still that one, the Last Judgment. And then his, much later, his Medici Chapel. You'll see it lasts from 1519 and 1534. It really does go extended. You have other works by him as well. Well, look at different works from these different eras of his style, and it goes into some of this also. And what it represents, you'll see the details talking about his contributions and views. And if you go on here, you can go into mannerisms. There he is. About the Laurentian library, which is about his architectural style here that he uses. And this is from a much later era. You'll see this from the 1520s to 30s, when he's working on this in Florence for Lorenzo. That's where the name comes from, Laurentian. The church there at the named for St. Lorenzo. And the details here. Well, that's what you're asked to look at. Choose works from each of his eras and how that reflects what's being emphasized, what he's trying to do. Where he is the Greco-Roman style in one, where he's more influenced by a different style later, where you see mannerism in another, and how each of those shows how art is progressing. So again, as you choose particular works from each of his particular times and do research over it, to discuss what is taking place in those eras. The last topic focuses upon chapter 14, which I'm going to try to get into. Yep, there it is. And this is a work by El Greco. When you go back and look at the beginning of the chapter, it talks about this particular work and then goes into it in particular here, where you see sort of a combination. Let's get this picture a little bit bigger for you, where you can see that there's sort of a realistic aspect to it, where people are being presented, and the idea about down here, this will be a very realistic view. Then you have more of a almost supernatural quality. And again, let me try to get this pulled up here, where you have other details offered, and the way the style is presented, and the details, and you can see some of these here that are offered. They're sort of almost surrealistic, as the figures are being presented themselves in different ways. So I ask you to look at this particular work, and then to choose two other works in Spanish aspect, the High Renaissance. One the realistic, one the mystical. And when you look at this particular chapter, you'll see that some of these are talked about. Again, I'll move this down here, try to move this up. You'll see where it talks about some of these different aspects of style in Spain here. And then you'll see where it talks earlier here about Spain and its views and aspects here. And so you have these details that are offered. In this particular part that we are, it has about connections, and that, of course, is not showing either. So let's see if we can get that to call up. Well, just wants to go to El Greco. It talks a little about, it says that they're no more distorted than other mannerists, but other times they are. So you have the different style here to put into particular ones. Well, if you'll look at if I can get this to actually work this time, we can go into Spain, and it's Golden Age, and the views there, and then architectural styles, and then hopefully the next part, yeah. Cordova there, and then it talks about El Greco, and then it gives you some of the details. There's actually another part about, here we go, visual arts in Spain, and decided about some of it changing, offered some different interpretations of views and what occurs there. Those are some aspects you can look at. You can look at some of the other artists of Spain during this time. And again, when you click on that, it just talks about some of the key points. And when you go to the preview of the chapter here, it talks about some of the changes that are taking place. So you want to look into those and look at El Greco. Excuse me for that. So that it asks you to choose two other paintings, realistic and mystical, to compare with El Greco's. You can look at those about Spanish painting style, and if you look into the modules, if I go back here, bear with me, under chapter 13, there we go, under this particular unit, you will see some of the details that are offered, and you can see some videos I have for you to look at, where it talks about some of these key traits and points that you can look at. And so you can review some of those. So these are the topics. This one involves looking for paintings and discussing those, realistic and mystical. The El Greco one has a combination of those. 9 asks you to look at works by Michelangelo from different eras of his art development and how that reflects the different changes in style. So you're asked to go through, choosing only one of the topics. A few years ago, when I was using similar topics, I had several different ones. I had a student who, there were 9 topics to choose from. The student wound up writing a small paragraph about each topic, and I let her know that's not what you need to do. You need a full essay over one topic. So again, researching the Medici family from the textbook and other sources. And again, Machiavelli's advice to how to rule, whether that's still appropriate advice. Researching the Black Death, the Black Plague. Researching one of the Crusades. Comparing modern college university to the medieval university, what they studied, how they, what they were part of, what services was there. You can go back and look at some of the details in the book. Comparing Romanesque architectural style, Gothic architectural style. And the idea of looking at Scholastica or Bridget. Again, we don't have much in our textbook. You have a sentence over Scholastica and about 2 sentences over Bridget. So you have to, I thought, out of these figures or more. And then the idea about the superhero or hero, the legends like Roland or Beowulf and what they represent and how they were used to convey the values of a society and what that's supposed to represent. And then, of course, you have modern-day heroes and superheroes. It depends on how you look at those ideas that are shown in media. I use media because you have movies, you have literature, you have books, comic books, you have television shows, and you even have video games where heroes are part of it, and what they are representing. One of the figures that's, in movies of a recent one is Spider-Man. And he's one of those figures that when he first premiered, I remember it, was a little different. You have a teenager, that's how he was when he first appeared, who suddenly has this power. What he's supposed to be doing, how he's supposed to be using it. Should he be using it in certain ways? And it's always a struggle for him in that one. And he's not your typical superhero. He's not the Superman who comes to Earth as almost a savior figure. He struggles and has issues. Well, what does that tell us about what our values are in a contemporary world, as opposed to Roland or Beowulf? Beowulf, who is able to defeat a monster that literally the monster, Grendel, comes in and picks up 30 men at a time, can swallow a man whole. And then there's Beowulf, who fights against it barehanded. When he's challenged by one of Hrothgar's warriors about fighting, and how Beowulf's story, it doesn't really fit. He's heard things about Beowulf. Beowulf says, "Fine, if you're guiding me here, I'll fight this monster barehanded. I won't use a weapon." And he doesn't. Well, what does that tell us about what that society valued, as opposed to what we see when we have heroes or superheroes in the comics or the movies? What that shows is what we're supposed to value, what we're supposed to consider to be important. And is it the fact that they're not perfect? Beowulf comes across as perfect. Even when he's an old man, at the end of Beowulf, he goes off and fights a dragon when nobody else will. Well, what's that show us they valued in the medieval era? What is it that we're valuing when we look at our heroes, those figures that are being presented in the literature, the movies, the television programs? And so that's what you're asked to look at in that one. So hopefully this has helped you some in understanding the topics and what you need to do, and how you can find information in your textbook, but also outside the textbook. Just a couple of words of advice on the research. When you're writing academic papers, again, follow MLA format, double spacing, have proper paragraph structure. When you use information from sources, cite it properly. And also, folks, for academic writing, you never use Wikipedia. Nothing against Wikipedia. It's just not for academic purposes. Do not use it as a source. Go to more appropriate, academically credible sources, which is why I showed you the library resources. You can click on this, and it will take you to whatever you need to try to find. You just have to hit the EBSCO button. You can click on that and look up whatever you're looking for, and use those kind of sources. Within the modules, of course, I do have for you, as you go down here, I have how to submit it to Turnitin, instructions there. Also, under the Start Here module, I have printed instructions on how to turn in a paper through Turnitin. In case you're wondering, and what you will do, very simply, you click on the assignment, which is this right here. The topic comes up, and then scroll down, and you will see the bar. And you click on this, and it will take you to the Turnitin website, where you will see a submit button. It'll ask you to browse your computer, find your saved file, and then you'll upload it from there. Going back to this module, you'll also see not only do I have the instructions for Turnitin. Let me keep going here. I also have an example how your works cited page should look. This one is very simple. It just has 2 entries on it. And it's supposed to call up. There it comes. And I give you the 2 alternative ways of citing the textbook. Here we go. Here's one source. And then here's the textbook itself, how you can use it. Or you can do it this way. Rather than listing the co-writers, you can also just put et al. That just means and others. You can do it this way. So if you're using the textbook, which I assume you will for most of the topics, you can simply copy this, paste it, and change your page numbers, whichever pages you're using. Or if you're using chapter 13 and 14, you can actually use volume 2, so you change it to volume 2 here. So that would work. And then this shows you how your sources should look when you list your works cited page. This is what's called a hanging indentation, where the first line goes against the left margin, other lines are tabbed over once. So I have that for you. I also have for you a sample essay. This is not over one of your topics. I vary which chapters the essays are over. This one is about Greco-Roman and Judeo-Christian views. And this one looks at the religious aspects of those 2 cultures. And so you can see how this is looking. There's a title. Here's how your paragraphs. This actually should have been over here. For some reason, the heading wound up tabbed over. Doesn't need to be tabbed over. But you'll see here's your paragraphs. Tab over your first paragraph, tab over your second paragraph, etc. Double space your essay. Make sure you put in your citations when you use information. Here's one from Cunningham. And it puts Cunningham and the page number. The idea about PACE, this was the article that was used. De novo is another article that was used. Again, details here that are offered. This actually should have been tabbed over one more time. When you're blocking something, it should have been tabbed over and doesn't need the quotation marks here. When you tab it over, you don't have to have that. But again, you'll see how this one develops, the approach to it, and discussion of it. And then here is works cited page, where again you have the textbook, and then you have two articles. And notice that the entries are alphabetized, and they are tabbed over. And you'll see these two articles were found through the EBSCOhost, which was that one that we looked at, the blue button, as it sometimes is called. So this is for you up there to look at, see how your paper can look, how you can develop a topic. So hopefully this is going to provide some details for you. And again, I apologize, this did not get posted earlier. It's just one of those things that happens. Again, I'll have an updated video over chapter 14 posted by tomorrow afternoon. But in the meantime, if you want to get a head start, I do have videos from 2 years ago. It's still the same material, still the same book. And in each of these, I discuss the chapters. And I have some other ones here, Zooms that are recorded last year that are offered. And then I have the Zoom meeting from this year that you can look at. That was a shorter one. It's only about 40 or so minutes because, of course, I spent part of the time in the class discussing topics, which actually I've been able to do a little bit more with the discussion that I did in the class, so this actually may help. So hopefully this will help you. I'll post this as soon as I can, and I'll send an announcement out letting you know that it has been posted, and I will post it probably under the major essay module, because this one does concern strictly the essay. I'll post it here and let you know that you can watch this. So again, I'm looking forward to reading your essays. I will probably wind up adjusting the date of the essay a little bit for you since I'm a little late, and I'll notify you that as well. So hopefully everything will go well, and I'm looking forward, as I said, to reading your essays.